everybody, this is Damien from Legion Life. With our bucket list talks, we look to share the tips, ideas and insights for you to go off and live a bucket list life. So we do this by interviewing travel experts, travelers and founders of travel companies who share us some ideas, tips and strategies for helping you to decide on what you should do for your next bucket list trip. So today I have the pleasure of speaking with Henry Stedman from Kilimanjaro Experts, a company that provides organized treks to help you climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Henry is also the writer of one of the best or best-selling guides on trekking Mount Kilimanjaro, as well as a number of other travel and trekking guides. Today, Henry's going to share with us some of his experience in climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and help you understand a little bit more if Mount Kilimanjaro is on your bucket list. So how are you today, Henry?
Fine, thank you. Thank you, Damien. Thanks for having me along. That's a very flattering introduction.
Okay, very good. So, well, to get started, maybe you can give us a little bit of background about yourself and also how your connection with Mount Kilimanjaro started.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was born in 1970 in England. I've been writing guidebooks for about, well, it's coming up to 30 years now. And I started writing the Kilimanjaro guide back in 2001. It was kind of like a joint decision between me and the publisher I'd worked with previously. I wanted to go there, I'll be honest with you, I wanted to go there less for the mountain and more because Tanzania, Kenya, East Africa was just not somewhere I'd been to before. And it was, my kind of love of traveling started watching the old David Attenborough wildlife documentaries and seeing, you know, all the lions and zebras, etc., in the Serengeti, and sort of thinking that's where I want to be. And I'll be honest with you, the Kilimanjaro guidebook was kind of my way of getting there. Since then, of course, I've fallen in love with the mountain and I've climbed it many times. But I'll be honest with you, it was kind of like at the start, it was more sort of like, oh, I can climb the mountain, write about it, and then I can actually go and see the Serengeti as well while I'm there.
Okay. So how many times have you actually climbed Mount Kilimanjaro now?
I've climbed it about, to be honest, I don't know the exact figure. I should actually count the certificates and find out for myself. I think it's about 33, 34 times now. Sometimes I'm leading groups. Sometimes it's because I'm updating the guidebook for the next edition, and I always try and climb it then. And sometimes just for our own personal sort of pleasure. I first climbed it in 2001. I can actually remember the exact date that I came down off the mountain, because as I came down off the mountain, having climbed it successfully, and I was, you know, a bit tired, looking forward to a nice hot shower, and I walked through the reception of the hotel, and there were a group of locals just staring at the television. Usually there's a couple of locals hanging around, but there was a lot of them hanging around staring at the television. And so I walked up to reception and, you know, I checked myself in, and I just sort of glanced at what they were looking at, and there was this huge explosion on the telly, and I thought, oh, it must be they must be watching some rubbish movie from China or something like that. And of course it transpired it was 9/11. So I know exactly when I first climbed the mountain, it was on that day.
Incredible.
Yeah, and I've climbed it, as I say, about 33, 34 times in total. Sometimes I climb it and I don't actually go up to the summit, either through choice, because I just want to look at the forest, for example, or sometimes I climb it and I don't go all the way to the top because there's one of the group I'm leading needs to be taken off the mountain, and I help with the sort of descent. That's happened once or twice as well. But yeah, when I can, obviously whenever I'm out there, I climb the mountain, and I still enjoy it, believe it or not.
No, incredible. So, well, tell us what inspires you so much about the mountain, and you know what kind of what's the message for other people who haven't actually climbed it.
I think for me personally, what I've said, I've climbed it all those times, and the joy is that it is always different. You go at a different time of year, you go with a different group, you go on a different route. There's always something new to find out. There's always something new to see. But for those of you who've not climbed it before, who have no idea what it's like to climb it, well, it takes about a week, sort of 6 to 8 days. The longer you take, the better your chance of getting to the summit. That's all to do with altitude, which we might come on to a bit later on. And when you climb it, there's this old cliche. They say that when you climb Kilimanjaro, it's like going through 4 seasons in a week. And it is, because you start off in the cloud forest on the lower slopes, and then as you make your way up the slopes, you leave the forest behind and you enter into this sort of moorland zone, very sort of mysterious, often quite misty zone with some very strange plants growing. And then as you continue up, you end up in this alpine desert, where little grows, and again it's kind of a strange, sort of eerie kind of place. And then of course you've got the snowy summit itself, and hopefully you've made your way all the way up there, and that will take you about 5 or 6 days. Then you get to the top, you have your photo taken, and then you trot all the way back down again, which only takes a day or so. But it's fantastic. It's not just I mean, I've sort of concentrated there on the nature, but there's also the kind of the personal achievement of getting to the summit. There's the friendliness and the camaraderie that builds up with your group, and with your porters and your mountain crew that help you to get to the summit. And it's just a very joyful experience, and it's totally, well, I should imagine, I can't think of anybody who I've led up the mountain for whom it has not been something completely different. I mean, it's just a completely different world to what most people, especially in the West, in Europe and in North America, are used to. And it to the point where, to the extent that when you actually get back home, it almost feels vaguely unreal. Like, did that really happen? It's a very peculiar sort of sensation, but it's wonderful, and it can be quite addictive. I'll be honest, most people, having done it, they'll sort of say that was absolutely brilliant. I've no intention of doing that again. But there is the odd person who will say, I need to do that again. I need to go on a different route. I need to see, even if they climbed successfully and got all the way to the summit, they still have that sort of like, I need to see a bit more of this. This is, and unfortunately, or fortunately, it happened to me too. And I just, luckily I'm in the position, because I write the guidebook, that it's my job to go up there.
Yeah.
So it's great. It's great.
No, awesome. So how did Kilimanjaro Experts come about?
Well, that kind of came about, without sounding too much like an advert, but it kind of came about because I've been writing the guidebook for about 10 to 15 years before I established Kilimanjaro Experts, and it kind of came about because there just wasn't a company that ticked every box. Like, there were companies that had great guides, for example, but they were treating their porters not very well. They weren't paying their porters well, or there was another company that paid their porters very well, but their safety procedures weren't the best. I could always find flaw in all the companies, and I thought, this is starting to irritate me now. And so I thought, well, let's put all the 15 years of experience of climbing the mountain as essentially a customer, if you like. Let's put that experience to good use, and let's build a company that I know, that I think ticks every box. And I've having climbed all these number of times, I know what makes a good company. I know a lot of good guides now, because I've been led to the summit by quite a few of them. I know the good cooks. I know the good hotels that you stayed before and afterwards. Let's put all that knowledge together and make a company that I think people will want to climb with.
Yep. No, brilliant. So, well, maybe now we can go off and talk a little bit about actually climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. So a lot of people have probably heard about it, but maybe don't really understand some of the background, like its elevation, how difficult it is to climb. So maybe you can kind of fill us in about that.
Sure. Well, Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest mountain in Africa. It's 5,895 meters above sea level. That's 19,341 feet. To climb it, well, first of all, to say to climb it is actually wrong, because it is just a walk. There are 6 routes up the mountain, and all of them are just walking routes. You don't need to be a climber. I don't climb. I've never climbed, for example. I've only ever walked or trekked. And yeah, that's all you need to do to get to the absolute highest point. So it's quite unusual in that respect. It's a dormant volcano. and it stands all by itself on the border between Kenya and Tanzania. It's wholly within Tanzania. Although most people actually think it's in Kenya, it's actually wholly within Tanzania, but obviously you can see it from the Kenyan side as well. It takes about a week to climb. As I said earlier on, the minimum number of days you can take is 5 days, but you'll find that there's a lot of companies that will not organize a climb for just 5 days because it doesn't give you enough time to acclimatize properly. And so it's actually rather dangerous climbing it in just 5 days. So really you should look at spending 6 to 8 days on the mountain. If you take 8 days, then your chances of getting to the top are fairly high. You give your body time to acclimatize, by which I mean you give your body time to get used to the fact that there's less oxygen at the higher altitudes. Your body gets used to breathing in less oxygen, and your body naturally acclimatizes to that kind of situation, but it does take time, which is why you should spend longer on the mountain in order to give your body that kind of time. So yes, if you take 8 days, that's ideal, but if you can't afford the time or money, 7 days is it should be long enough for most people. And again, if that's if you still haven't got the time or money to afford a 7-day climb, then 6 days, it's a bit of a rush, but most people do still make it to the top.
Okay.
No,
brilliant. So how do you actually get to Mount Kilimanjaro? So what are some of the routes you can get there?
Well, it's got a lot easier recently. There's always been an airport at Kilimanjaro Airport. It's and over the last few years, there's been an increasing number of airlines flying to it. I'm very delighted to say. So there's about half a dozen airlines now, big airlines as well: Qatar Airlines, Turkish Airlines, Kenya Airways. The most reliable and long-standing is KLM, the Dutch airline.
Yep.
So all of those flying there, and from there you go to your base will either be Arusha, which is quite a large city, about an hour and a half, 2 hours drive from the mountain, or there's a smaller village, smaller town called Moshi, which is only about half an hour to an hour away from the mountain. And from there, then you basically you meet up with your guides. You have a night in a hotel, usually, possibly 2 nights if you can afford the time for that, and then you begin your trek after that.
Okay, so what is Mount Kilimanjaro available to everyone? Because now you're saying it's a climb as opposed to, a walk as opposed to a climb. So that opens up a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd like to say that it is really. I mean, it's there is a legal requirement that you have to be over the age of 10.
Yeah.
Having said that, I've helped people get permission to climb it who have been under that age, and I think the record now is a 6-year-old has managed to get to the summit. At the other end there, I think the record is now an 89-year-old. I could be wrong. They might even have a 90-year-old now. But anyway, you're talking upper 80s, early 90s have managed to get to the top. That's the record that's been broken quite frequently over the last few years. The oldest person to stand on the summit of Kilimanjaro. So certainly age is no barrier.
Yeah.
We've also had disabled climbers, but we've had there's a guy from South Africa who's made it to the summit in a wheelchair a couple of times, and a couple of other wheelchair users have managed to get to the top as well. Blind climbers, there's usually a group of blind climbers who manage to get to the top as well each year. There's no real barrier to getting to the summit of Kilimanjaro. And even fitness is not that much of an issue.
Yeah.
Now, I should point out that the fitter you are, the more you're going to enjoy your walk.
Yeah.
Because if you're not fit, it's going to be, you're going to be puffing and wheezing your way up the slopes, and you're going to be falling behind everyone else and sweating, and it's just going to be rather an unpleasant experience. So the fitter you can be before you get to Kilimanjaro itself, the happier your experience. But there are plenty of people who would describe themselves as not particularly fit or active who have also managed to get to the top. And as long as you give yourself enough time, then that's possible. It's not really fitness that prevents people from getting to the top. It's either altitude, as I mentioned before, or the other one is attitude. There
Yeah.
are those people who sort of talk themselves out of getting to the top, and I don't want to sound critical of them, but it is definitely a case where people just sort of like, they say, oh, I've got a bit of a headache, or and I'm not feeling right. I feel too cold, and I just can't do this. And they turn around, even though myself and the local guides know that they actually could do a lot better and can go a lot further.
Yeah.
So attitude and altitude are certainly the two biggest reasons why people don't get to the summit. But yeah, you can, when people say, how fit do I need to be to get to the top? I usually say it's not that you need to be fit, it's that you need to be not unfit. See, I mean, if you are really out of condition, then yeah, you really need to sort of, pull your finger out and do some exercise before you get to the mountain.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't prevent you from getting to the summit anyway.
Okay. So basically the message is, some time before you're planning to go, make sure you put in some miles, walking, running, or whatever it is you want to do, just to kind of
Yeah,
build up some base endurance.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you are, like, I get people writing to me saying, can I climb Kilimanjaro? I don't do much exercise. I just walk the dog for an hour each day. And I'm sort of thinking, well, that's exactly the exercise I do each day. and the only advantage I have is I have the confidence of knowing I can climb Kilimanjaro. That's the
Yeah.
only advantage I have over them. I don't do much other sort of physical. I'm 51 years old now, and I've got a 6-year-old boy, so I don't do as much exercise as I'd like to. I've got a dodgy knee, had a knee operation, so I don't do the tennis and football and all those things I used to do when I was slightly younger. Yeah, and if you're worried about your fitness, then obviously aerobic exercise is the way to go. Jogging, cycling, swimming, all of those are great, but the best exercise you can do is walking. And if you can do a multi-day walk that involves camping overnight somewhere, well, that's the best exercise that you can do for Kilimanjaro, because you're essentially emulating the experience you're going to have on Kilimanjaro, albeit without the altitude. Obviously, if you've got a mountain near you that you can go practice on, that's even better, because then you'll get the acclimatization as well.
Yeah.
But even if you don't have that, just going for a multi-day walk somewhere in your own country is such good training for Kilimanjaro. And it not only physically, but it gives you the confidence to say, look, I could walk and camp. I could walk again the next day, and it's not a completely alien experience. And in fact, it's quite fun. And if you go to Kilimanjaro with that attitude, then you're pretty much, you're halfway there, certainly. Then you've just got to worry about the altitude.
Yep. No, very good. So now let's talk a little bit about the altitude, because a lot of people will be concerned about that. So is there any way to kind of like know if you're going to be more impacted than other people by altitude, or can you prepare yourself? So
I think the bottom line, the first thing to say is there's no real way of knowing whether you'll get altitude sickness or not. There are certain indicators, like if you live at sea level or near sea level and you've always lived there, then yeah, the chances are your body will not be used to going to altitude and it might react badly. Fitness is absolutely no indicator. Some of the fittest people I know, like England rugby players, the tennis star Martina Navratilova, these people who are very fit, famously very fit sportsmen, they have failed to get to the summit because of altitude. By the same token, I know of several people who have been rather overweight, who I've led up the mountain, not in great condition, but they've managed to get to the top. So really, it's difficult to tell who's going to suffer from altitude and who isn't. There are ways of minimizing your chances of getting altitude sickness. And I should quickly explain that altitude sickness is where basically your body doesn't acclimatize well to the lack of oxygen, and it kind of manifests itself in several ways. Your sort of loss of appetite, headaches, nausea, and it can develop and get worse. And there will be a point where your guide, as long as he's halfway decent, will say, no, you need to go no further, you need to get off the mountain now, and they'll take you down off the mountain. So it is safe as long as you've got a good guide and go with good company. But yeah, you need to there are ways of sort of minimizing the chances of getting altitude sickness. Um, the first thing is to go slowly. And when you're on the mountain, you'll notice after the first day on the mountain, your guide will suddenly be walking very slowly, like with a deliberate sort of tread of an elephant, if you like. And it feels quite unnatural when it first starts. It's just like, why aren't we going at a normal walking pace? But it's useful. It gives your body just that little bit more time as you're gaining altitude, as you're going up the slopes. It gives your body more chance to get used to that increase in altitude. Eating well, drinking well, both of those are very important. There is a sort of cheat as well, and that is to take this wonder drug called Diamox, which sort of first appeared at about 2005, I'm going to say, probably did earlier actually, but I was sort of first came aware of it somewhere between the first and second editions of the Kilimanjaro guide that I was writing. And it's sort of, I've never taken it myself, but I have to say most people do now pack it, even if they don't actually use it on the mountain, they do at least bring it with them. And I have seen the positive effect it has had on people. I mean, they can be sort of struggling up the mountain with a headache and not eating, and you give them this pill, and within half an hour, they're skipping around the slopes like a newborn lamb. I mean, it's incredible to watch. It does seem to work. There was always a sort of worry about whether it actually helped you acclimatize or whether it was actually just masking the symptoms, and actually, which obviously would be dangerous. It seems to be accepted now that it does actually have a beneficial effect on you acclimatizing. So it's not just masking the symptoms. And it is easier to get hold of. Ask your GP is obviously, your doctor is the first thing, your first approach. If they can't help you, then there are various stores, or you just get in touch with me and I'll be able to put you in touch with places where I know you can get it. It's not illegal. The reason that the doctor may not prescribe it is because it was actually developed as a drug for glaucoma, the eye disease.
Okay.
Now, how somebody made that link and said, well, it works for eye disease, it must work for altitude sickness. I've no idea how somebody made that leap. But anyway, that's it's still, as far as I know, it's still just licensed as a treatment for glaucoma. But everybody knows it now, more famously, as a treatment for altitude sickness and as a preventative for altitude sickness. So that is kind of like the shortcut, if you like.
Yeah.
But if you'd rather not take drugs in order to help you get to the top, then there are various other methods. One of the best things you can do is, if you do happen to have a mountain conveniently on your doorstep at home that is above 3,000 meters, I know it's unlikely, but some people do have, then going to the top of that, or as high up the mountain as you could get, is going to help you, as long as you do it fairly close to your departure for Kilimanjaro. You'll get some sort of acclimatization benefit from doing that.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a good way of doing it. And there is also a mountain near Kilimanjaro called Mount Meru, which is a wonderful mountain to climb. It takes 3 or 4 days. You see, I'll be honest with you, you see more wildlife on Mount Meru than you do on Kilimanjaro. You'll see elephants, buffalo, giraffe, wild boar, monkeys, baboons. It's a beautiful climb. As I say, it takes 3 or 4 days. You get up to, I think it's 4,566 meters. Perfect acclimatization preparation for Kilimanjaro itself. So if you can afford the time and money to climb both mountains, my goodness, I thoroughly recommend you do so.
Awesome. No, very good pointers. So now the next step. So you've made the decision to head over to Mount Kilimanjaro. So how do you select the guides? Because you indicated you started your company because you were, a little bit iffy on some of the options available. So what should someone really be looking for?
Okay, well, at the risk of sounding like a salesman, but I do genuinely believe this, I think the first thing you need to do is to get hold of a copy of my guidebook.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is because, as far as I know, I'm still the only one. I actually review the companies that climb Kilimanjaro. I can't review them all because there's several hundred, along with several agencies who use those companies. But I try and pick on all the big ones, all the ones that I think are doing a good job, or the ones that you should check out. So if you can get hold of a copy of my guidebook, that I think is the first thing you should do. The next thing to do is to kind of work out how much of a budget you have for your climb, and then also to make a list of things that are important to you. For example, if it's important that the company you climb with treats their porters well, and porter treatment and welfare is a very important issue on Kilimanjaro. So if that's important to you, then you need to go with a company that is a partner of a charity called KPAP, the Kilimanjaro Porters Assistance Project, and they recommend good companies that you can go with that treat their porters well. Other things, well, maybe food's a big issue for you. Maybe you'd like a company that's based in Moshi rather than Arusha. Maybe you want a company that can also arrange a safari for you after your trek. There are all these sort of little facets to organising a trip, and that you should bear in mind when you're trying to choose a company, because choosing a company is pretty much the most important decision you're going to make when it comes to organising your Kilimanjaro trip, because they're the ones who are going to basically look after you on the mountain, and the mountain is obviously going to form the biggest part of your trip. So it's vitally important that you choose a good one, because they're going to not only look after you, make it a fun climb, but they're going to keep you alive.
Yeah,
you're going to put your life in their hands. So it is a very important trip. If you don't want to get hold, or you can't get hold of a copy of the guidebook, then do at least look at my website, climbmountkilimanjaro.com, where I do give several pointers on, spend quite a few pages actually discussing how to choose your company.
okay. So you pointed out a good point there about risks. So what are some of the risks on climbing Mount Kilimanjaro?
Well, it really, I mean, the biggest risk is obviously the altitude.
Yeah.
And you need to have a guide who can not only spot when somebody is starting to suffer from the symptoms of altitude, but also knows what to do about it. And it's a judgment call with those guides, because they want you to do as well as you can on Kilimanjaro. They don't want everybody to get to the summit, and it's something that we, our company Kilimanjaro Experts always emphasizes to our guides, that we don't want everybody to get to the summit. We want everybody to do their best. That is obviously a different thing. Yeah, sure, if everybody can get to the summit, yes, we want them to get to the summit. But I don't want anybody to be pushed beyond their limits, because of course that's dangerous. That's dangerous. And so you need a guide who is good at making that judgment, who is capable of recognizing the symptoms of altitude, but recognizes when those symptoms may well alleviate over time and disappear over time, and or what treatment that those symptoms need in order that the guy can then continue, the guy or person or gal can then continue up the mountain. So this is a judgment call. He's got to decide when to send the person back down the mountain, when to let them rest, or when to say no, you could go a little bit further, and then we'll check you then, because obviously safety is absolutely number one importance. And the second thing is to make sure that the people do their best, so that at least when they come off the mountain, they don't feel that they could have gone a bit further. And that's the kind of the most important thing. And so that is why it's funny actually, because I had an email from somebody yesterday, and they insisted on this on the guides having a thing called Wilderness First Responder qualification, which is like a first aid for those who are in the wilderness. And it's a very good course, and it's a very good qualification to have. I've got it myself. But I wouldn't actually say that that's the most important thing to have. It's not the first thing I look for when I'm looking for a guide on the mountain. What I'm looking for when I'm looking for a guide on the mountain is that he has to be friendly and sociable, and he also has to have experience, because they're the ones who know best when to make that judgment call about letting somebody continue, or asking somebody to stay where they are and see how they progress, or asking somebody to come off the mountain. I think that's the most important thing. The qualifications are great, but they're just kind of like that. They're almost like they're an advert rather than a real thing, if you know what I mean. If I was suffering, or if I was in trouble on the mountain, I'd rather somebody who had experience rather than somebody who had a piece of paper saying, they know what to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what's the best time of year to climb?
Um, well, there were two rainy seasons that you should probably avoid. That's April and May, and November to mid-December. Now, you can climb throughout the year. The mountain is open 365 days a year. Um, but April, May, and November, yeah, your climb's going to be likely to be a soggier one.
Yeah,
And also the views are likely to be limited. And that's a big disadvantage, because one of the reasons of going up Kilimanjaro is to look out, across the East African plains below. Now, if you manage to, if you have to climb in those times, then I still recommend that you do. It's still a lovely thing to do, and there are chances that the rains will fail that season.
yeah,
In which case you'll have a lovely climb, because there won't be hardly anybody else on the mountain, which
yeah,
will be, which is fantastic. My personal favorite times to climb are just before those rainy seasons, so March and October. The reason being that people not only avoid the rainy seasons, but they also tend to avoid those months just before the rainy seasons, just to be safe, just to be on the
yeah,
safe side. So you usually get really good weather those times. And also it's a little bit quieter, because avoiding the crowds is something that I really recommend people do on the mountain, because you go on any mountain for a wilderness experience. You go to see what the mountain is like. You don't really want to be joining a queue of people, waiting to climb up a particularly steep slope or something. It kind of takes away from the whole experience. So we try and advise the people who climb with my company to take a route that's a little bit less used, and to go at a time of year that maybe is a little bit quieter, just because I think the experience is better, and it doesn't necessarily cost any more to do that.
yeah. No, very good points. Well, this is a good lead into the routes. Previously, you mentioned there are 6 official routes.
Hmm.
And then we can also talk a little bit about the unofficial routes. So maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview of the 6 routes, how long it takes, some of the advantages, disadvantages.
Sure. Okay. So let's start. I'm going to start at sort of 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. So sort of northeast side of the mountain, and and I work my way clockwise round. So northeast, you've got the Rongai route. It starts right against the Kenyan border. It takes between 6 and 7 days. And the route sort of divides after a couple of days, and you can either take a more direct route straight up to the summit, but I advise you, for reasons of both acclimatization and views, to take the route that takes you up a peak called Mwenzi, which is actually the second summit of Kilimanjaro. The main summit is called Kibo. The second summit is called Mwenzi, and it climbs up the slopes of Mwenzi, and it gives you a great view across to Kibo. And so it's a great route. I really do recommend a lot of people take that one. It's not my favorite, but it is a really good alternative. Disadvantages with it. The only disadvantage I could really think of is that it's actually the driest route, because it's on that northeastern side. It's actually the driest route, which means that you only get, on most sides of the mountain, the whole of the first day is spent in cloud forest, which is wonderful. On that northeastern side, you only actually get about half an hour cloud forest, and then it suddenly disappears and you're in the moorland zone. Other disadvantages, well, it probably costs a little bit more, purely because the transport to get there is a little bit more expensive, because it takes a bit longer. But other than that, it's a really good route.
Yeah,
Moving round to about, I'd say about 4 o'clock on the mountain, so sort of, what's that, southeast. You got the Marangu route, the oldest route on the mountain. Was always the most popular, although now it's the second most popular route on the mountain. It's the only one where you sleep in huts rather than camp. All the other routes, you're sleeping under canvas. This one, you actually sleep in these old huts, which sounds like it might be nice if you have an aversion to tents, but actually those huts tend to be rather drafty. They're not particularly comfortable. So I would advise those who have an aversion to camping to maybe just sort of put aside that aversion if you can, because I think you'll find it more comfortable being in a tent than being in a hut.
yeah,
There are a couple of disadvantages. Now, I think the Marangu route is a lovely route. It is a beautiful route, but there are a couple of significant disadvantages. The first one is it has the lowest success rate. Nobody's really sure why. It's probably something to do with the altitude profile of the walk up. But for some reason, statistically, you have less of a chance on the Marangu route than on any of the other routes. And the other disadvantage, which I think is maybe more significant, is it's the only route where you go down the mountain the same route that you went up. So essentially, you're seeing the same scenery twice, which is a bit of a shame. So for those reasons, we don't usually organize that many climbs on Kilimanjaro, as well as the fact on the Marangu route on Kilimanjaro, as well as the fact that it is quite a popular route. And as I say, we try and avoid the popular routes. Okay, so moving around, the third one, sort of due south, is the Umbwe route. This is perhaps my favorite, although it is quite a short route. It takes 5 to 7 days to climb. This is my son, also called Henry. Say hello, Henry.
Hello.
Okay.
How's it going, Henry?
I won't be long. I won't be long, darling. Just want to go and play, and I'll be with you in a second. Okay. And the Umbwe route, it's actually the least popular route on the mountain because it's got this reputation for being the hardest. It's still a walk, but it is quite steep. And as long as you build in a couple of acclimatization days, as in days where you just rest, then it's not really a problem. It's beautiful scenery and it's so quiet, so I really do recommend it. And then moving slightly around, then you come to the Machame route. It's a lovely route. It is a beautiful route, but I don't recommend it because it is so busy. It's just got so busy. It's now the most popular route on the mountain. Sometimes it can feel, in the busy season, sometimes it can feel like you're just joining a queue of people up the mountain, and it kind of detracts from me. If people want a sort of bog standard cheap climb, then they'll probably end up on that route, and that's fine. And it is still a beautiful route. And if it's the only one you can afford, then by all means take that route. But I think there are better options. Moving around, you've got the Lemosho route, the longest route on the mountain, perhaps my favorite. I advise you to take 8 days, although it can be done in 7 days. And it's just a really beautiful, quiet trek. Very high success rate because you have to take 7 or 8 days to get to the summit. And it's disadvantage is, well, it costs a little bit more because it's a little bit longer and because the transport is a little bit more expensive. The last route, the Shira route, don't recommend you take that because it is largely a 4-wheel drive trek now, used by emergency vehicles. I know 1 or 2 companies still use it, but essentially you're going to be, you'll have vehicles driving past you for the first couple of days, and I kind of feel that's not really worth it. And also, most companies who do use that route, they tend to actually drive through the forest in order to start above the forest. And I sort of feel that any walk on Kilimanjaro that doesn't include a cloud forest is a walk that's wasted. I really do. Okay. So they're the 6 main routes on Kilimanjaro. So
what about the unofficial routes? Because you were talking about them as well.
Yeah, well, we've tried to sort of combine. I should start off by saying that the park authorities insist that you only use the official paths. So what we've tried to do is combine the paths in order to build better routes. And so we've built 2 routes. The one's called the alternative Lemosho, and the other one is called the full circuit Umbwe. So basically they're using as bases my 2 favorite routes on the mountain, Lemosho and Umbwe. Just to briefly describe them, to start off with the Umbwe one, as I said to you, it's a beautiful, quiet route, but the disadvantage with it is that it is quite steep and it has a reputation for being the hardest route. And because it's quite steep, so you do need to build in acclimatization days. And so to counter that, what we've done is we've done a full circuit Umbwe, which means that you actually go all the way around the mountain. So rather than just spend a day sitting around the camp in order to acclimatize or going for a little, 2-hour walk here and there on one day, we actually take you all the way around the mountain. And it's a beautiful route. It's seldom done, but it combines the advantages of Umbwe, which is it's quiet and it's really beautiful. But it gives you a much better chance of getting to the summit as well. And it gives you a complete sort of idea of what the mountain looks like. And the other one is the alternative Lemosho. And that builds on the Lemosho route, which is already, as I say, one of my favorites of the official routes. But it takes you, rather than going around the southern side of Kibo to get to the summit, it takes you around the northern side of Kibo, which basically takes you away from the crowds. And the other advantage is that statistically, in our experience, it's got the highest success rate of any route on the mountain. It's the number one. That's the sort of two unofficial routes we use. And if you can find a company that offers unofficial routes, obviously we do, but if you can find one, I think you'll find it to your advantage, because they tend to have thought a bit more about the experience for climbers on the mountain, and it kind of makes it tends to suggest that they're a more professional company, the one that actually thinks about how it's going to be for their climbers.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So what do you need to kind of like pack before you head off to Kilimanjaro?
Well, you'll need, the first thing to say, I suppose, is have a look on the website, climbmountkilimanjaro.com, where you'll find a full packing list. But to be brief, you need clothes that cover all 4 seasons. So you'll need shorts and t-shirt for sort of lower slopes when it's quite hot and sweaty. But by the time you get to the summit, you're going to need thermal underwear, you're going to need base layers, you're going to need a fleece or 2 or 3, and you're going to need some sort of down jacket or summit jacket, as well as woolly gloves, a couple of pairs of gloves, hat, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to need a fair bit of clothing. Other stuff you'll need, I won't give you a complete list now, but just a few items. Sunglasses, because obviously the sun up there is very hot. Sun hat, sun cream. Again, the sun, is fierce up there, so you will need lots of sun cream. Snacks, don't forget to bring snacks, because they'll help you. They're just good for morale, if nothing else, when you're on the mountain and you're just walking. And it's also good to share with your porters and your fellow climbers, just to make friends. Head torch, because you'll be climbing at night. When you get to the summit, you actually do that through the night. And so you'll need a head torch then. Most people carry trekking poles, and if you're my age, or well, basically over 40, then it's a good idea to have trekking poles, not so much for the way up, but the climb down. I should say that once you've got to the summit, it takes about a day and a half to actually get down to the exit gate, and you walk at a normal pace then, and that could be quite killing on the knees. So if you're above 40 or so, I'd carry a pair of trekking poles, because that can really alleviate the stress on the knees. Obviously, you need a good pair of boots, a pair that is waterproof, durable, got a good grip, they protect your ankles, all that kind of stuff, and make sure they're thoroughly broken in as well, because you don't want to get blisters. You need plenty of pair of socks, thin and thick. That's kind of everything you'll need. And you'll need to carry 2 packs with you, or bring 2 packs with you. You'll need a big backpack, somewhere about 80 to 90 liters, and that will carry everything. That you bring that will carry most of your stuff, including sleeping bag, sleeping mat, all that kind of thing. But you don't actually carry that on the mountain. That is what you give to your porter, and they'll take that up the mountain with you. And then you will actually carry a day pack, and that will just have things like sun hat, sunglasses, sun cream, your waterproofs, your water, because you'll need to carry about 3 or 4 liters of water with you each day, because you need to drink regularly to help you avoid altitude sickness. And so you will need to bring water bottles with you. So it's that kind of thing. That's what you'll actually be carrying. So that day pack will need to be about 30 liters in size.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So what does a day on the mountain look like?
You'll have a briefing the evening before, and the guide will actually tell you what the next day is going to look like. But usually it involves sort of being woken up at about 7:30, 8 o'clock with a hot drink and a sort of a bowl of hot water and a bar of soap. I should explain that hygiene is pretty limited. Hygiene opportunities are pretty limited on the mountain. There are some of the more expensive companies which offer things like a shower, but to be honest, it's not really good from an environmental point of view to have a shower, and that shower is likely to be pretty minimal anyway. It's not going to be a power shower, put it that way. So you'll probably just get a bar of soap and a bowl of hot water, and then your dress, get out your tent and dress, and then go and have breakfast in the mess tent. Breakfast will probably consist of like a cooked breakfast or maybe pancakes or omelette or something like that. Plenty of tea, coffee, cold drinks of water, pieces of fruit. And then you'll basically just have your day pack ready and packed, and you'll set off hopefully before 8 or 9 o'clock, depending on what you've agreed with your guide the evening before, and you'll just start walking. And you'll be walking with a guide, and he'll make sure you don't go too fast, and he'll set the pace. And there'll be another assistant guide, because you have to have a guide for every 2 people on the mountain. So if we've got a group of 4 people on the mountain, we'll have a guide and an assistant guide. And that other guide will be at the back to make sure that there's no kind of stragglers, and he will go essentially as slow as the slowest person. So you'll never be left behind. And you'll just march, and you'll stop somewhere to have lunch, and the guide will, point out various features of the mountain, various flowers, animals you may see along the way, and of course, it's advisable that you ask him questions, not only about the mountain or what things that you see, but also about his home life, about what it's like being a Tanzanian. What kind of school he went to, what kind of school his kids go to, how he got into guiding, all these kind of things. You got plenty, you got 7 or 8 days on the mountain with him. You may as well get to know him. Become his friend. It's part of the whole joy of it. And you just keep on walking, and then when you get to camp at the end of the day, and it's usually a fairly relaxed day. I mean, sometimes you even stop before lunch on some of the shorter days. But latest you'll get to camp will be about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, unless, there's been a bit of a mistiming or somebody is particularly slow. But when you do finally get to camp, you'll find that your tent's already been set up. The mess tent has already been set up. You'll be welcomed with a hot drink and some popcorn or biscuits. And you'll be told what time dinner is. And it's a sort of a convivial kind of atmosphere. It sounds the way I've talked about it, it sounds almost colonial. You've got these porters running around setting up your tent and breaking your tent up in the mornings, and I suppose in a way it could be portrayed as that, but you've got to concentrate on getting yourself to the summit, and that's the whole point. We try and make it as easy as possible for you to do that, because it's hard enough. You're in a very alien environment. These guides and porters, they've been on that mountain many times, so they know they can make it to the summit, so they could take up the slack, if you like. You're just there to have a good time, and that's what we're aiming to do, and to be as successful and to do your best on the mountain. And so that's why you get that kind of service. Now, you can have a minimal service, and it might save you a little bit of money if you do, where you don't have a mess tent and you have fewer porters. But you don't really save much money by doing that, and I do think it kind of detracts from the overall experience. But if you want to test yourself like that, that's fine, and we can arrange it for you like that. And you just so you get to the end of the day, and you've had your evening meal with your fellow trekkers, maybe a game of cards or some just a conversation. You go to bed, and I'll be honest with you, you go to bed fairly early, through choice. There's no sort of curfew or anything. But maybe on the first night you might sort of stay awake till 9, 10 o'clock. But after that, when the sun goes down, it gets a bit cold. Even for the first night, it gets a bit cold, and you're kind of like, well, I'm really getting on well with these guys, but I've had my dinner. I'm feeling quite exhausted. I could do with bed. And it's not unusual, particularly by the time you get to the upper slopes, that you're kind of in bed by about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And that carries all the way through until the night before the summit. And then you get to that base camp at about maybe about lunchtime. You may have a little acclimatization walk in the afternoon, and then you'll have an early dinner, and then you'll be in bed at 5 o'clock, because you're going to be woken up at midnight or around that time, and you'll have a quick snack then, and then you just got to start marching through the night in order to get to the summit at about 6 o'clock in the morning. That's the usual procedure anyway. Some people take a daytime summit, but I'd say about 95% of people still go for the nighttime summit.
So what's the difference between nighttime summit and daytime summit? Just the views?
Well, I get asked this an awful lot as to why everybody takes a nighttime summit, and I've never really come up with a conclusive answer. There are several sort of reasons. There's the whole sort of romance of seeing dawn rise from the highest point in Africa or the African continent.
Yeah.
There's certainly that's a lovely thing. There's also a sort of safety aspect, as in you're most likely to be in danger, obviously, the higher you are on the mountain. So if you sort of get into trouble near the summit, then we've got an entire day of daylight to get you back down. Now, hopefully you know, if you are in trouble, you would have been stopped well before you get to the summit anyway. But it gives your team more time to get you off the summit, and a lot more daylight. So there is that. But there's never really been a conclusive answer as to why it should be that everybody takes a nighttime summit. It's just the way it is. Another reason which I heard, which I think is quite a good one, is that at nighttime, the slope of Kibo, that the main Kibo summit, on which you'll find the highest point in Africa, it's kind of a scree. It's like gravel. And so when you're walking up it in the daytime, it's like walking on a sand dune. It's quite hard work. You know, you take one step up and you slip back slightly, and then it gets quite exhausting. But at nighttime, that scree sort of freezes a bit more. And so it's not so exhausting. I've heard that as the reason, and I kind of feel that's probably got an element of truth to it as well. That could be actually the main reason. But having said that, I've taken a few daytime summits, and the joy of having a really quiet ascent up to the summit, and often being the only group at the summit, is quite a lovely one. It has to be said, because at the risk of taking away a bit of the romanticism, when you climb through the night and you finally get to the top at about 6 o'clock in the morning, you may well find about 7 or 8 other groups there and about 50 other people there. And that kind of and you've got to wait for your turn to have your photo in front of that famous summit sign. And it does kind of, I wouldn't say it belittles your achievement, but it kind of takes away slightly from the whole feeling, the whole sensation of finally getting to the summit. It's like, oh, I'm not so unique after all. whereas when you're, when you get there by yourself, it feels a bit more like a sort of like, wow, this is a unique experience. And it does feel like a unique experience when you go up in the daytime. So there's certainly are advantages with going up in the daytime. I wouldn't rule it out. But if you're in a private group with you and your friends, that's certainly something to discuss.
Yeah.
But if you are joining a public trek where you're going to be joining strangers who you don't know who they are, usually because you're on your own, or it's just a couple of you and you want to join other people to make it slightly cheaper, then you're going to have to expect it to be a nighttime summit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's the average group size?
Well, that really depends. We at Kilimanjaro Experts, if it's a private group, you can be as big as you like, because you're going to know how many people are in your group. You're going to expect it. You're not going to be disappointed, by how many people are in your group. When it comes to a public trek, we stop taking people after it reaches 8.
Yep.
Occasionally, if there's 7 people booked and 2 people turn up and say, "Could we join that group?" We'll extend it to 9 people. But usually about 8 is the maximum. Most other companies, I'd say, they sort of stop it at about 12 or 15.
Yeah.
I think 12 is the absolute maximum for a public group, because after that, you're really sort of detracting from the wilderness experience, because it's not just you 12, it's all your guides, which I explained earlier. There's a head guide, and then there'll be a guide for 2 people. So that's another 5 other guides for that group of 12. You've got your cook, and then you've got all the porters. And you're looking at about 40 to 50 porters for a group of 12. It's a lot.
Yeah.
I know it seems amazing. It's about 3 or 4 porters for each person.
Yeah.
And so you start feeling like a sort of battalion, like an army, and it kind of detracts from the whole wilderness experience. You're not going to see much wildlife for a start, because
too much
that
noise.
number of people. You're not going to be able to maintain much silence. The wildlife would have fled, that's for sure. And so we try and limit the numbers, try and keep it to a small size, and I think our climbers appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I mean, private groups, we've groups of 70 or more, I've seen on the mountain, and it's if that's the way you want to do it and you're expecting it to be like that, that's fine. Everybody climbs Mount Kilimanjaro for different reasons. I climb because I like the nature, the environmental, or the sort of wilderness side of things. other people want just a social experience. And of course, with 70 other people, you're going to get a very social experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, well, that's another reason why I prefer the sort of alternative climbs, the unofficial routes, because they will take you away from that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, you know. Yeah.
So no. So I've heard that you have an option when you're looking to summit that you can stay at Crater Camp. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Now, I have to say, I maybe hold an opinion that isn't the majority one here, because I
Yeah.
actually, when I've stayed at Crater Camp, I haven't actually enjoyed the experience that much. I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you, but I realise I'm in the minority, and I don't want to dissuade anybody from staying at Crater Camp if that's what they want to do. My personal experience is that staying at Crater Camp, you spend a couple of hours looking at the features on the crater, the Furtwängler Glacier, which is nice. There's the ash pit and the sort of inner crater, the Reusch crater, and you get the smell of sulfur, which proves that Kilimanjaro is actually a volcano, and it's not an extinct volcano. There is still volcanic activity going on underneath the surface. All of that's great, but it takes 2 or 3 hours to see it all. And then the rest of your time, you're just sort of hanging around the campsite, shivering your butt off, and you're kind of, you've got a bit of a headache developing, and you're quite high up. You're about 5,700 meters at that height.
Yeah.
And I personally am not a big fan of it. I'll be honest with you, but I know people who really rate it, and absolutely, despite my own personal opinion, really have their heart set on it, and they've enjoyed the experience. Despite what I say, they've enjoyed the experience. So I'm not, as I say, I'm not going to dissuade you from doing it. That's just my personal experience, is I don't think it's worth it. What I do think you should do instead is, if you want to see the features on the crater, is find a company, certainly our company, Kilimanjaro Experts, will do this, is that if you want to see the features on the crater without actually spending a night at Crater Camp, then have a word with your guide at the briefing before you're even on the mountain, and say to him, look, I'd like to see the features of the crater. Is it possible? And he'll say yes. And then when you actually get to the summit, or just before you get to the summit, remind him of your wish. And then when you get to the summit, turn to him and say, right, can I go and see the features on the crater? And he will, I presume he's agreed to it. He will then take you back down the mountain via that crater, so you can then go and see the features that are on the crater, the Reusch crater, the ash pit, the Furtwängler Glacier. Now, it takes 2 or 3 hours more to what is already a very long day. It adds 2 or 3 hours of walking, so it does make for a very long day. But it's cheaper. Rather than spending a night at Crater Camp, which is quite expensive because you've got to pay not only $100 extra, but in sort of park fees, but you've got to pay the extra wages, because we have to pay a premium to our porters and things because they're going higher than they normally would. But also, it's less dangerous because you're not spending an entire night at that altitude. You're just seeing it on the descent. And it's just much more pleasant. It's a much more pleasant experience in my view, anyway. And you just have to pay like a $20 tip to your guide to enable you to do that, and that's it. Now, I have to say that most people who think it's a very good idea, by the time they've got to the summit, are sort of had enough, and they'll sort of say, actually, I did want to go and see the crater, but actually I just want to turn around and go back down the mountain now. Which is fair enough. I'd say that's about 60 to 70% of people do that. But by the same token, 30, 40% no, can we go and do it? And they do it. And that's absolutely fine. You just need to find a company that will be willing to organize that. And that's absolutely great. I should just sort of maybe go through briefly the itinerary for that last day. So I've told you that you get up at midnight and you walk to the summit, which takes you at about 6 o'clock in the morning. You then have to descend, which you'll get back to a base camp. It may be the same one that you ascended from, but it may not be. And you'll get there at about 11 o'clock for breakfast, and you'll probably have an hour's break. And then you've got to keep on marching down the mountain, and you won't stop until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you've been walking since midnight. And so that's a 16-hour walk that you've been doing with just an hour's break. And so it's quite hard work. And so it's good that you that's why I mean by it being a very long day, if you add another couple of hours to that. So you've got to be prepared, because most people, are prepared for the ascent and they're mentally prepared for the ascent, and they don't realize quite how hard that descent is. It is a long old afternoon. It's nice in one way because you no longer have to sort of walk very slowly like with that deliberate tread of an elephant that
Yeah,
I described earlier. You could just, free go as fast as you want. But it's quite tough on the knees, and it's quite exhausting, and you're wearing all your warm weather clothes, cold weather clothes, because you've been at the summit. But obviously you're going back down into warmer weather, so it gets quite hot and sweaty as well. But if you got to the summit, then the fact you've got to the summit will sort of take you through. And you're sort of like, well, whatever life throws at me now, I can handle it, because I've got that sticker that proves I've got to the top.
Yeah. So basically, your day will finish around about 3 or 4 o'clock.
That's right. Yeah, and then you'll have a sort of, it'll be a nice if you get to the summit, then that will be a lovely last meal on the mountain, the last evening on the mountain. And then the next morning, you'll probably tip your crew. That's the usual procedure. You'll have breakfast, and you'll be back at the exit gate, all being well, by about lunchtime on that last day. And then if you're with my company, for example, Kilimanjaro Experts, then we'll take you to Moshi for lunch, and then we'll take you back to Arusha for your back to your hotel, where you'll have a probably celebratory last meal with your fellow climbers, and a hot shower, which even more importantly. And then the next morning you either fly home or you'll head off on safari or to Zanzibar, whatever else you've got planned for your trip.
So do you have any last tips, insights around just climbing Kilimanjaro?
I think we've sort of covered most things. What else could I? A couple of quick tips. Firstly, don't forget chapstick, because I know it sounds a ridiculously small thing, but the number of times I've forgotten chapstick, and you end up, you come to your summit photos, basically your lips are all blistered where they've been under the sun for several days, and then by the time you get to the summit, the wind's whipping and it's whipped all the skin away from your lips, so you end up looking like a leper for those famous summit photos. So don't forget chapstick for your lips. Don't forget to bring water bottles to hold several liters. You'll need 3 or 4 liters, as I say, of water each day, so bring enough capacity for that. Don't forget to bring a head torch, not just a regular torch, because you'll need it. You want to keep your hands warm when you're climbing up the mountain during that nighttime ascent. For men, don't forget to bring a pee bottle, which basically is a bottle that you wee in during the night, because it's really cold at night. If you've got your own tent, which if you can request your own tent, if you've got your own tent, that is quite nice not to have to put all your clothes on, get out, go to the toilet, get out of tent, go to the toilet. It's really quite cold. So I would advise have a pee bottle. It's basically a bottle that you wee in. In the morning, you could just empty that into the public toilet. I know it sounds disgusting, but as I say, hygiene standards aren't quite what you may be expected to, maybe used to at home on the mountain. And every bloke that I've told that to is very thankful that I've told that to. For women, there is a thing called a she-wee, which I've been told does kind of the same job. You can basically wee in a bottle. So yes, there you go. So there's some sort of minor tips for the mountain. Other tips, I think we've pretty much covered everything in terms of when to go and what route to take and all that kind of stuff. Try and read up a little bit about the history, because the history of Kilimanjaro is fascinating. And as I say, don't be afraid to ask questions, because you're going to spend quite a little bit of money, a few $1,000s on this trip. Make sure you can make the most of it. Get to know your guide, ask them questions, and not just about the mountain. Just find out about them as people, because they're lovely people.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So after the trip, you mentioned safari options. So what are some of the ones you take people on?
Well, let's just be sort of very brief about this. You could do the number one thing after the mountain is to go on safari. It's kind of like a reward for all your efforts on the mountain, because you'll just be sitting in a safari vehicle, most likely. You can take walking safaris as well, but for most of the time you'll be sitting in the back of a Land Rover looking at the animals. The safaris could be as short as a day trip, or as long as a week or more.
Yeah.
You basically go around what is known as the Northern Circuit. It's basically several national parks. There's Manyara, Tarangire, Ngorongoro Crater, Serengeti, and Arusha National Park. They're the main parks. The most spectacular is Ngorongoro, which is a extinct volcano, this massive volcano, which is extinct, and all the animals live inside the crater. And if you just want a sort of brief hit and to see as much wildlife as you can, then that's the place to go.
Yeah.
The scenery is spectacular. The wildlife is just incredible. It's almost like sort of Jurassic Park. It's just a fabulous place. I advise everybody, even if you only got a couple of days, go there. The Serengeti is probably the most famous one. That's where you see the wildebeest migration, which you've probably seen on various wildlife documentaries. And that's just beyond and adjacent to Ngorongoro, but it takes a little bit longer to get there and to look around it. And then Manyara and Tarangire, they're smaller ones, but they've both got their advantages too. If you've only got a day trip and just want a nice relaxing day, then there's Arusha National Park, which is only like an hour from Arusha city itself, where many people are based for the Kilimanjaro climb. Yeah, and I advise you really, if you've not been on safari before, it's one of my favorite activities. It's fabulous, a nice relaxing way to sort of, just eat up the time after your trek.
Yep, no, brilliant. So one last question on Kilimanjaro. So if you were to give any kind of advice or recommendation on why someone should include Kilimanjaro on their bucket list, what would it be?
Well, because it's completely unique. It really is unique. That the scenery is unique. The whole experience. It's very, it's one of the highest mountains, if not the highest, that you could walk to the top of. There's very few others that can claim that particular crown. And so if you want to sort of challenge, if you want to see some unique flora and fauna, if you want to go through 4 seasons in 4 days, the variety of it, and if you want to have an achievement and be able to say to somebody when you're next sitting on the underground in London or in America or wherever you are, and say, look, just turn to somebody and say, I've been on the highest point in Africa. It's that kind of, it covers all bases really, whether you want the physical challenge or whether you want the holiday. It's unique. It's unique, and I kind of advise it for everyone, because it is for everyone, as we've talked about at the very beginning of this conversation. There's no age limits, and there's really no sort of physical limits.
No, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Henry. It's been wonderful. I'm sure a lot of people got some insights and certainly got some valuable tips. I'm sure a lot of people were looking to see how they can get up on Kilimanjaro in the short term. I'm definitely one of them. So maybe you can help people, help find you online. So where best can they find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, if you are looking for just general advice, then, because I've actually got 2 websites on the all Kilimanjaro based. The first is climbmountkilimanjaro.com, and that is basically the website that accompanies the guidebook, and that's kind of, if you like, I wear a kind of neutral hat there. I don't try and sell people treks. I just try and advise people. It doesn't matter who you're going with, or if you've not chosen a company, I could advise you on any aspect of climbing the mountain. If you're worried about what to bring or which company to go with, I could point you in the right direction. As I say, I try and wear a neutral hat. I try not to push people. It's not about selling treks. So that's climbmountkilimanjaro.com. If you want to know more about the particular treks that I organize, then that's KilimanjaroExperts.com. And as I say, that's more about the company. We try and organize the best value treks on the mountain. We're not the cheapest because we don't exploit our porters or our guides, but we do try and organize the best value treks on the mountains. And as I said at the start, I try and use the best guides that I've ever met, and I think we've managed to achieve that, certainly. And we try, we just try and run a fun organization that's safe and that organizes good value, great treks. And certainly the reviews on TripAdvisor seem to back that up as well.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, thank you, Damien. It's been an absolute pleasure. And our paths cross soon. I'd love to bump into you on the mountain, or even organise your trip on the mountain. Let's see how that goes. Eh?